Nearly 3 weeks since the country went into lockdown, with much of the world in similar circumstances. And what a difference it has made to people, to businesses, to the economy, to charities, to the way we live, to how we spend our time, to the different things that we have become accustomed to. The things we're just doing now that we take for granted are things we wouldn't have thought of 3 weeks ago. I had to go out to a post office yesterday, and you go into a shop and you keep away from people. There's that separation, and there's lines on the floor that says this is the distance you need to keep. These are new things that have come in over the last few weeks, but they seem to become the new normal. 3 weeks that have totally changed our country, and 3 weeks that have changed the way that many people are thinking about things and looking at things. Ruth has been sharing how the time that she's been able to spend alone with God has encouraged her to think in different ways about how she can reach out to others and how she can introduce people to Jesus. But throughout our country, throughout the world, people are thinking differently, asking questions. 3 weeks that have changed our nation. But in the Easter story, it was 3 days, Friday to Sunday, that totally changed everything, or at least changed how people understood things. If you were with us on Friday, you know that we were thinking about the darkness that came over the land while Jesus was on the cross. And we thought about what Jesus was doing under that cloud of darkness, how he was dealing with the problem of sin, how he was putting it right, how he was making it possible for God to reconcile the world, for God to draw us into relationship with himself. And we reminded ourselves that at the end of that time, at the end of those 3 hours, as he cried with a loud voice, as he said, "It is finished," he was able to proclaim that cry of triumph, of victory, to say that sin has been dealt with. It had been done. He had won. But for his friends, for his followers, for the crowds, for the authorities, for the world, he had lost. He had been defeated. The movement that he had started 3 years before had ended in his death. That was their perception. But it was on Sunday that it all changed, as Jesus burst from the tomb to demonstrate that he had won, to show the world that he had come through death, that he was alive again, and that his life would never end. On Friday, there was darkness. But on Sunday, there was light as an angel comes down, rolls away the stone that was over the entrance to the grave, to allow people to see that Jesus was no longer there. And his appearance is described as like lightning, bright, terrifying, not to be ignored. But the light of the angel would have been eclipsed by the light of Jesus if he had been there in all his glory. So many times we find Jesus referred to as the light. Way back at the beginning of his earthly life, when he's taken to the temple, and when he's just a few days old, and he's met by Simeon. And Simeon speaks words over him, words of prophecy, words of power. And one of the things that Simeon says is that this boy is born to be a light for revelation to the Gentiles. That this person was going to grow to be a man and to bring God's light, God's hope, God's blessing to people like us. John, at the beginning of his gospel, speaks about Jesus being the true light that gives light to everyone. Many people try and say that they have the answer, that they are the people to follow, that they have the insight. What John reminds us is that Jesus was the true, the only light that is worth following, living under. And he came to give light to every single person in the world. That's what was said about him. It's what Jesus said about himself in John chapter 8. When he's speaking to a group of people, he says, I am the light of the world. He goes on to say, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Sometimes, and we've been reflecting on that this morning, life can be hard. Life can feel dark. And we need to recognize the reality of that and be there and support each other. But Jesus says that if you follow me, you will always have my life, always have my light with you. And in that we can have confidence that whatever we're feeling, the reality of the light of Jesus is still there for us, is still shining into our lives. You remember the time when some of his followers had the privilege of seeing him revealed in something of his glory on the top of a mountain. He was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. They saw something of who Jesus really was. And it'd be wonderful this Easter if we each, in whatever is going on in our lives, were able to see something of who Jesus really is. To recognize, to rejoice in, to rest in the light that he wants to pour into our lives. From Friday evening to Sunday morning, people thought that the light had been put out. But then on Sunday, they start to realize that it was still a light. It is still burning powerfully. It must have been so strange. We know that dead people don't come back to life. But something miraculous has happened. The power that Chris just referred to of raising Jesus from the dead has been exerted by God, and he is alive. No wonder when the angels speak to the women and they tell him that he is alive, that they are afraid. One of the last verses that Pete read said the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy. Afraid after meeting with this visitor from another place. This frightening angel who had spoken strange and unexpected words to them. But rejoicing as they left the place of death. That was not where they needed to be anymore. The one they'd come to see, the one they'd come to remember, the one they'd come to embalm, the one they'd come to celebrate, was no longer there. They'd left that place. They ran to tell the followers of Jesus that he was alive. But on their journey, they meet with Jesus himself. Not the angel, but the one the angel had been speaking about. And Jesus speaks words of comfort and peace, banishing fear. Jesus says, do not be afraid. They had been frightened by their experience. Jesus comes and removes that fear. Darkness has been replaced with light. Fear has been replaced with joy. Today, Jesus still comes to his followers. Jesus still shines his light into their lives. Jesus still comes to his followers and encourages them to not be afraid. This is a vitally important message for us to hear in terms of our relationship with God. That having trusted in Jesus, having come to that relationship with him, we can live without being afraid of anything that would come against us. Without being afraid even of death. Because we know that Jesus has gone through that before us and for us. And it is so vitally important for us to hear and to receive and to live in the reality of this truth in the difficult times that we're living in. As we are aware of people suffering terribly. As we have heard, even this week, of loved ones dying. As we know that some people are unwell. As we may be afraid and concerned about the impact that this is all going to have. And into that situation, Jesus comes again and says, do not be afraid. He does not say that we will not go through suffering. The disciples to whom he first gave this message suffered in many different ways. But he is saying that we do not need to be afraid if we are walking with him, if we are trusting in him. And whatever is going on, we can have confidence that the light of Jesus will never go out, will never be overcome by circumstance or difficulty. John, again, at the beginning of his gospel, says this: the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Words we find right at the beginning of John's gospel, words written tens of years after the life, the work, the death, the resurrection of Jesus. And as the writer looked back over those years and reflected on everything that has happened since, that time that they'd worked and struggled and served while Jesus had gone back to heaven, as he looked back on all of that time, he was able to say with total confidence that the darkness had not been able to overcome the light of Jesus, and neither will it ever be able to. As we reminded ourselves on Friday, we are living through a time of darkness, but this will not overcome, will not overpower the light that is in Jesus. And with that hope, we need not fear whatever happens to us, wherever this journey takes us. What an amazing privilege, what an amazing thing we are being brought into. That the person we trust, the light under whom we live, the light that we allow to guard our lives and to guide our paths, will never be put out. But this privilege brings with it responsibility. As we recognize that there are many people in this world, many people in this town, who have not received this light that is only to be found in Jesus. So for them, there is much more reason to fear, much more reason to be uncertain about the future, particularly as they think about that wall that Chris was speaking about. And Jesus says to us, as he said to his first followers, that we are to share his light with them. He says, you are the light of the world. No one else is. You, we, God's people, are the ones that he has chosen to bring his light into this world. Friends, as we live in the light, as we celebrate the risen life of Jesus, and let's do that. Let's celebrate what he has done. Let's be aware of that amazing privilege, and let's seek to bring his light to those who need to really experience it at this difficult time. Because Jesus is alive, we can rejoice. There is no need to be afraid. We should celebrate. We should share this wonderful news with others, just as the women at the tomb did with the followers of Jesus. 2 questions, and then I'm going to split into groups to continue to share and to reflect and to pray and to rejoice in what Jesus has done. 2 questions. What difference is the risen light and life of Jesus going to make in you this week? And with whom are you going to seek to share that light this week? What difference is it going to make? And with whom are you going to share it? Let's just pray for a moment. Father, I just want to thank you for that amazing moment when death was finally defeated, when you acted in power and restored your son who had done everything that you had asked him to do. You restored him to life. He came out of that grave. He appeared to people. He showed that he was alive, and we rejoice and we recognize and we celebrate the reality that he is alive today. And Father, I pray that that reality will change us on the inside and will transform what we do on the outside, so that we may live as those who are living in the light of the risen Jesus. Bless us, be with us, we pray. Amen.